what is up with this Willow quantum computing thing? Is it going to kill Bitcoin? And and I would say like it's all real time evolving, and we're trying to learn about this real time. But the big news was that Google came out with this quantum computing announcement that I think had sort of been in preprints and sort of had some knowledge about its existence before, but it actually kind of dropped in, I think, one of the major like Science or Nature, one of the major scientific journals. And so that got everybody in the Bitcoin community asking like, what is going on with quantum computing, and are we about to, is Bitcoin dead? So let's start it off spicy. Is Bitcoin dead?
Hold on. Let me check.
Yeah, nice.
When's the last block that was mine? Oh, it looks like the internet's dead. Okay, there. All right.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So Willow is ascendant.
So no, Bitcoin's not dead, but it's a great topic to talk about. Multifaceted. I mean, I think we should preface it first saying none of us are cryptography experts, quantum computing experts. So I think our discussion will be really good, maybe to help people think through what are the right questions to ask and what are the right things to be thinking about. So let's talk about some of that. One thing that I always ask is, right, I just feel like the internet at large remains still bigger than Bitcoin. So any kind of concern about quantum computing breaking the discrete log problem or solving that problem and rendering elliptical curve cryptography kind of moot, that doesn't just threaten Bitcoin, it threatens all security on the internet and like really huge portions of society. So it's this is far bigger than a Bitcoin problem. So one thing we should all be looking for is like, what are other communities? How are they thinking about it? How are they reacting to it? What are they doing? In particular, internet security. And I don't know the answer to that. But I don't really see panic or people concerned about that. Right. I see way more panic about Bitcoin than I do about the internet at large. So should there be panic about the internet at large? Is there panic? What are people doing about it? That's one area that people should be exploring, and we should be learning more about, and we can talk more about in this show as we learn.
Yeah, like Bitcoin panic should be a subset of internet panic, not not the main course.
So that's one I think one important point. And I guess sort of the corollary to that, since I'm not aware of panic for internet at large, I'm not super panicked about Bitcoin. Right. But secondly, like I don't think we should stick our heads in the sand. I mean, these are reasonable questions to be asked. At the very least, people into Bitcoin should like have solid, credible answers instead of just brushing it off as like, not a concern. Even if the reality is this is not going to be a concern for 50 years. Okay, well, you Bitcoiners talk about Bitcoin lasting for hundreds of years or millennia or whatever. So what are you going to do when this is a concern in 50 years? So it's a very reasonable question to ask, and we need to keep developing better answers.
And is you mentioned discrete log problem? I've heard of discrete log contracts, but I didn't know of discrete log problem. Is that part of how like ECDSA 256 works, or is that?
Yeah,
how does it?
It's part of elliptical curve cryptography in general. The basics of that are you start with a private key, which is just a really big number. And as the name suggests, that's what you want to keep private. You don't want to share that with anyone else. From that number, you can generate a public key, which, as the name suggests, you can make that public, give it to people. And of course, this is not Bitcoin specific. It's used for all kinds of communication, like Signal uses this and all kinds of applications.
And that's used even in HTTPS, right? So if you go visit HTTPS, Amazon.com, and you want to make sure you're actually putting your credit card into Amazon, that's the same cryptography.
Yep. And so underlying the security is the premise that you can multiply big numbers. There are known algorithms that can be done on regular CPUs, general computation, that can multiply really big numbers quickly. But the discrete log problem is that you cannot use a general computer to do division of really large numbers. So what that means is that you can take a private key and you can generate a public key because you're doing multiplication. But to go backwards, if you have a public key, you can't generate the private key unless you break the discrete log problem and you can do division of really large numbers. And so there's proofs that we can't do this with general computers, but Shor's algorithm from this guy in, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, developed an algorithm that with a hypothetical quantum computer that you could efficiently do division of large numbers. So the break here would, like, if that became feasible, then no one's Bitcoin would be safe, but no internet security would be safe. And also it breaks a lot of data that's encrypted too. So like you might think all your messages over Signal are safe, but all of a sudden, boom, they're not safe because they can be broken. Sorry, Mac.
Yeah. No, I think it's also just worth taking a moment to pause on cryptography in general and the magic of it, because all the stuff that you're explaining, Steve, is obviously correct, and it's very interesting and sort of technical. But one thing, when I really went down this rabbit hole deeply in 2017, trying to understand like how does ECDSA work and all that stuff, the thing that I really stuck with me actually was a passage from one of our favorite mutual authors, DK, Kevin Kelly, in his book Out of Control. And he makes this claim that, cryptography basically is essentially the closest thing to magic that we have, although perhaps quantum is the next form of magic, and is based on, we have the technical understanding of everything as Steve's saying, but if you kind of just put on the caveman view for a minute looking at it, it's this kind of really magical, weird property of the universe in a way that it's easier to multiply than it is to divide. And that asymmetry is an asymmetry that in some ways, one could make the argument suggest that the universe is, at least with our current understanding, protecting individual rights in a way, or allowing decentralization to thrive, because so much of technology is centralizing. But this one weird kind of like inexplicable fact about the universe means that asymmetry for the individual to protect information and use weapons grade munitions, as cryptography used to be called, on par with what a state or a really large actor can do, is absolutely incredible. And so that's something that I think is just, it's worth, taking a moment to just like, it always blows my mind that this is a fact that even exists in the universe. And right. I don't think that quantum computing obviously, that's a whole different set of magic. The idea that you can have, instead of just a 0 or 1, potentially something both being a 0 and a 1 simultaneously. Certainly not an expert there, but that's another form of magic. My best understanding is that we're not fundamentally breaking this principle of the universe yet, that asymmetrically allows the individual to protect against the larger actor, because we've had lots of different codes that have been broken, at different points of human history, the Enigma code and all kinds of cryptography. And we always find new areas of that. And so from just doing, sort of a cursory glance at this in the last couple of days, obviously, again, caveat, I'm an expert, but it does seem like there's lots of PhDs in universities who are, pretty far into quantum resistant cryptography, based on things like lattice cryptography, stuff that I'm certainly not an expert on, but there are fields where this is actively being researched outside of the Bitcoin community. And also from companies, not only like Signal, but my understanding is like Apple, for example, has a ton writing on cryptography. They're employing some of the best minds on this. So it does appear that this principle of the universe is not going to be yet broken by new magic. The big question in my mind with all of the quantum stuff is just how fast is the rate of progress for quantum versus getting these new algorithms ready for Bitcoin. And once they are ready, how fast can we actually roll something out? Those are questions that I still am not, fully clear on yet.
Right. Max, you mentioned universe, but which universe? Because
right.
Let me read it this is from the Google Willow announcement. This is mind-boggling number exceeds known timescales in physics and vastly exceeds the age of the universe. It lends credence to the notion that quantum computation occurs in many parallel universes, in line with the idea that we live in a multiverse. So maybe another question we should ask is like, does Bitcoin break in certain universes and not others? Who knows?
Or is there a Bitcoin that hasn't been invented in a certain universe and you too can be your own Satoshi? You just have to redefine the universe.
I
Right.
believe that the Tulloch and Joe Lubin.
So they're actually in another universe. Yeah.
And actually, just one last note on that while we're going sort of cosmic. I mean, these are all great questions. I think it's also fair to say, to the best of our knowledge, no one's freaking out on the internet and Bitcoin yet. But we don't know yet. We're figuring all this out in real time, and these are reasonable questions. But did you guys ever watch the show Mr. Robot?
I've seen a few of the episodes. Yeah. I know the general vibe.
Yeah. If you haven't, it's super. It's the only. I'm not into TV. It's the only show that I've watched multiple times, and I absolutely love. It blows my mind. I think the cypherpunks out there will all get a lot out of it. Bitcoin, I think it was filmed in 2014, the season that featured Bitcoin heavily. So they were kind of ahead of their time. First couple of seasons rely heavily on this idea of the global financial system collapsing. So there's stuff around Bitcoin. In their case, instead of CBDCs, it's Evil Corp, their currency. So there's a lot about sort of Bitcoin and the individual versus, collective. But then the later episodes, without giving too much away, dual with quantum. And so one of my big takeaways is I need to go back and watch those last couple of seasons. Because whoever did that show, they seem to be honest.
Cool. So
about like actually, what do we know and what do we not know about? Is this a problem in 3 years or 30 years or never? It's impossible. Because actually someone who I don't know who it was just posted the Bitcoin dev list saying that they're claiming that the elliptical curve behind Bitcoin is going to be cracked by 2027, so 3 years. So there's people making those types of claims.
Then that's unrelated to quantum. That's just regular computation.
That's quantum.
Oh, that's quantum. Okay.
No, it's been proven that it can't be broken with general computation.
Okay.
So, most of the smart, credible developers I know and cryptographers within Bitcoin generally, I think, feel like it's decades away, but they don't dismiss it, but decades away. But what do we know? This Willow, I think it was announced like 105 qubits or something, and maybe other computers have been developed by someone that are on the order of 100 qubits. I believe we've all seen that using Shor's algorithm to break SEC 256 K1, SEC P 256 K1, which is the curve used by Bitcoin, would take on the order of 1 million qubits. That still doesn't tell me a whole lot though, because we don't know how quickly it's going to accelerate from 100 to 1 million. I've also seen some people claim that you can take a lot of 1,000 qubit computers and network them together to get to 1 million. I don't know. Is that how it works? Is that feasible? I don't know. But I don't think we should immediately dismiss it saying 100's a long ways away from 1 million. So we don't have to worry about it. We should inquire and ask more questions. But that's one aspect. The other rudimentary thing I know about quantum computers, it's hard to keep them running for very long. So how does that play a role? Qubits versus how long you can run the computer. Seems like that's two separate related they're related to the problem, but two separate factors. And a third is error correction. And that's what I think, my understanding of the real big breakthrough in Willow. It's not like the 105 qubits. It's that Google did make a breakthrough on error correction. And someone who understands this a lot better than me told me that prior to that, it was a super linear problem. For each computation, positive computation you did, or productive computation, each incremental contribution, positive contribution, actually increased the number of errors in a super linear way. And with the Willow announcement, it actually reversed. It's sublinear. So that seems like a huge breakthrough.
And that's as you're adding new qubits. If you go from 50 to 100, you would normally have before Willow you would have superlinear accrual of errors, and now you get sublinear accrual of errors.
That's what I was told. Cool.
And that's a big breakthrough that presumably.
But it's another. So I think the best we can do for people is like suggest like here's areas to like inquire, ask questions, learn more about, including ourselves.
Yeah. One big question we have then is, okay, let's say, whatever, there's some confidence range that's not going to happen in the next 3 years, but we don't know. Like, let's say something does break in the next 3 years or even sooner. It's not like the Bitcoin community is completely head in the sand. People talked about this. Satoshi talked about this, well over, 14, 15 years ago. What, practically the ECDSA curve we're using gets broken. What next, Steve?
Yep. And another factor to that is like, or in terms of what happens, it also depends on like, how does the attack reveal itself? Meaning, do we have like 20 years heads up? Like, meaning like we're getting some heads up now, but is it just going to gradually get better and better? And then like, we're sort of like, it becomes more and more obvious that, oh, we're 7 years away. We're 5 years away. It's going to happen in 6 months. Like if we keep getting those heads up, obviously we can both prepare a lot better, take it, treat it with urgency, and also any kind of like time frames and deadlines we can give to companies and individual holders of Bitcoin. Like you need to take action. The bigger the heads up, the more practical that becomes. Or it's just out of the blue, one attacker gets this power and uses it, and just instantaneously steals a ton of Bitcoin.
Yeah. Also, like, how would it impact Bitcoin? Is it that it like makes the private keys associated with a public address you can find accessible then?
Yeah.
Is that the core of what?
Let's start. So, Bitcoin mining, several parts of the Bitcoin software uses a hashing algorithm, SHA-256. Bitcoin mining in particular uses that. It's vulnerable to quantum computing, but not as bad. Another algorithm by a gentleman named Grover's algorithm makes it reduces the complexity to find preimages for hashes. But my understanding is it wouldn't destroy mining. It would just, whoever has that capability would be able to mine blocks just vastly more efficiently than anyone else. So as long as that
would difficulty adjustment basically take care of it,
as long as that's not centralized power, right? If it's one entity that has that power, then yes, the difficulty would adjust, but only they would be able to mine blocks. So
I see.
As long as that capability is distributed well enough, and ideally just open source and anyone can do it, I think that's no big deal. There'd be like this interim period of a massive difficulty adjustment, but we've already been through that. Like when we went from CPUs to ASIC, right? That in a very short period of time, we've already dealt with that. Obviously, Bitcoin's bigger now. We need to think through the ramifications a little bit, but I think it would largely be a hiccup. The more concerning thing is what you mentioned, David, which is basically any coins that are locked up, different Bitcoin. There's different ways to lock up Bitcoin. Lock up meaning like if someone sends you Bitcoin, you generate a Bitcoin address, it gets sent to that address. The type of script used for that, the code used for that, there's over the years there have been a number of different ways and mechanisms to lock up Bitcoin. People might have heard of some of these, like Taproot or Segwit or more recent ones. You might have heard of like pay to pub key, and there's all these very technical terms. Some of them expose the public key and some do not. So the ones that expose the public key are absolutely vulnerable to a quantum break. And so anyone with that power could generate the private keys for all of those Bitcoin and spend all those Bitcoin, take all those Bitcoin. So in particular, the notable one is Satoshi. So it's believed that Satoshi mined something like 750,000 to 1 million Bitcoin based on various patterns that can be observed. And, those coins have never been moved. We don't know who Satoshi is. He might be dead. And so those would be all for the taking. But it's not just those coins. There's other early miners and other early Bitcoiners who locked up their Bitcoin using this pay to pub key mechanism. But also there's a lot of Bitcoin that there's a lot of Bitcoin address reuse. So a lot of like companies reuse addresses. And when they do that, that exposes the public key wasn't exposed until there's a spend, but if they reuse the address, then it's been exposed. I know that like in 2018 or 2019, Peter Willow analyzed how many Bitcoin are exposed this way. And I think he came up with like 6-7 million Bitcoin at the time. So, I mean, it's a lot.
And exposed this way means if there was a pay to pub at a specific address, when that transaction gets mined, then the public key that's associated with the private key that controls that transaction gets revealed somehow or exposed.
No, there's certain Bitcoin addresses. So a Bitcoin address is I can give you a Bitcoin address and you can pay it. Using the pay to pub key mechanism, the public key is in that address. So
I see.
Whereas there's other mechanisms where I give you a Bitcoin address, such as pay to pub key hash or pay to witness script hash, and I give you a Bitcoin address and my public key is not exposed in that. It's actually been hashed a couple more times. So it's like layer upon layer of cryptography.
And that's purposely added later in the evolution of Bitcoin to try to plug a hole of the visibility of the
pay to pub key hash was in the Satoshi era. I forget if it was in the initial code drop or not, or if it came quickly after that. I'm not sure, but those are protected. But then Taproot reintroduced the concept of the public key being public and not protected, which was mildly controversial at the time. But basically, like Peter made the case, like there's already 7 million Bitcoin exposed. Like this is an issue. Also, even if your Bitcoin is like protected in that way, when you go to spend it, you reveal the public key. So if your if an adversary has a super powerful quantum computer, they can just outbid you when your transaction's being broadcast and trying to be mined. Mm-hmm. So in the best cases, neither you or the adversary gets the Bitcoin. The miner gets all the Bitcoin because you just burn. You burn right as you compete with the adversary. So, I mean, suffice it to say, essentially, again, though, it depends on the details. The quantum computer, is it so fast that it can actually, solve these things in within, milliseconds? If so, then all Bitcoin would be exposed. If it takes like minutes, hours, days, weeks, then those who have public keys exposed, 7 million coins or whatever, would be vulnerable. But there's 7 million coins or 20 million coins. I mean, it's like, it would be a very radical event, catastrophic event. And who knows? So what do we, I mean, whether this happens in 3 years or 50 years or 100 years, what would we do? There is cryptography, which is like quantum safe or quantum resistant. So that's good news. It's part of cryptography research and development. So then
it's basically already good enough, we think, to mitigate a problem if we can figure out how to introduce it into the system.
Yes. So the obvious question is, okay, why don't you guys do that? Well, the problem is the size of the signatures are enormous. So if we thought we had scaling problems already in Bitcoin, we'd be like 1000xing, right? I don't know the exact factor, but think on the order of like 3 orders of magnitude more space needed per transaction. So it would really hurt the usefulness of Bitcoin today on something we're already hurting on scaling, and we're already trying to improve. So taking like 1000x step backwards is not really what we want to do for a problem that might literally never occur or be 70 years away.
Right.
So, and also, I mean, the hope is that each and every year cryptography gets better and better and better. And so like in 20 years, there could be quantum resistant cryptography, which is maybe only like 10% bigger, or negligible or something. And then that becomes kind of a no brainer to introduce it to Bitcoin. and have this gradual transition period, kind of like SegWit and Taproot. It takes like 4 to 8 years for the whole ecosystem to transition to a new technology, but it's done peacefully without any like major hurdles. So hopefully that's the way it can occur. One thing that could occur sooner than later, though, I've mentioned this Taproot a few times, and it's quite complicated, so we have to get into all the details. But at a really high level, one thing Taproot enables is that you can have different ways to spend your Bitcoin. So you receive Bitcoin, and instead of just like one way to spend it, you can have multiple different spending conditions. So like one could be like, I have like maybe the three of us each have a key. So it's like a 3 of 3 multi-sig. It requires all 3 of our keys to spend the coins. Or it only needs 2 of our 3 keys, but there's like a time lock. You have to wait. We like 2 of the 3 of us can't spend it for a year. You know, so you can create these different conditions. Well, there could be another spending script which uses this quantum resistant cryptography, and it would only be used in the case if and when shit hits the fan and there's a quantum computer. And the nice thing about Taproot is all the spending scripts that you have for your coins that aren't used when you spend them never need to be actually used and put on the blockchain. So even if it's really big, when you just regularly spend your coins, it would never be used. It's just a safety valve. It's an emergency backup in case that situation occurs, and then it would be really big, but at least you have an option. And what would need to occur then is that when a quantum computer shows that it can crack all the private keys on Bitcoin, a soft fork, a consensus change would be needed for Bitcoin to make it so that none of the coins could be spent using the old technique, only this new technique, and those with that power could then spend their coins. But it gets into really interesting philosophical issues, right? Such a change would then effectively freeze all coins that didn't have this upgraded path. So that gets really tricky. What's the right solution there? In particular, like Satoshi's coins, assuming, I mean, if we knew for a fact Satoshi's dead and there's no heir, and that like literally if we just knew for a fact no one had the private key anyway, well, then we could make the ethical decision of like, okay, that's fine for those coins, but what about other people's coins?
Right.
And also we don't know that. We don't know if someone, whether it's Satoshi or an heir, has access to those coins. And, I think Bitcoiners hold near and dear to their heart to not ever break the principle of you shouldn't seize someone's coins. Certainly at the protocol, right, to have protocol developers change the code and then everyone to adopt it to seize anyone's coins really breaks a strong principle. So that needs to be, that philosophy needs to be grappled with too as we look at solutions here.
And even if Satoshi or some of these early guys are dead, I mean, who knows what happens in the future? I mean, Hal Finney is cryogenically frozen, as best as I understand. So I think there are many arguments for not changing the spin conditions on those coins. But one question that still is not clear to me is, okay, so all of those kind of like gradual rollouts, it sounds like it's not perfect, but we have a decent path to get there. What happens in the case that tomorrow we wake up and I don't know, some rogue scientist from Google is just hacking coins? I think I recall reading a quote from Satoshi saying that he believed in that kind of a case, which I would consider the worst case scenario, probably the least likely, but you never know, that the Bitcoin community, which is much smaller than, would be able to find consensus and potentially, I assume he would be hard fork there at that point to before the quantum, some agreement block before the quantum computer came online. Do you think that would still be the case today, or are we way beyond the ability to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if at block height, 1 million or whatever, that's when this attack occurred. There'd obviously be a lot of public discussion about this situation, and there could become consensus that like, okay, at block height 1 million, that is that is the accurate ledger of who owns what. We fork in a change, which protects against that attack, and proceed from there. I mean, there's a history lesson with Ethereum and the DAO attack,
right?
So that again, it's a really interesting philosophical discussion, because like I think a lot of humans, their instinctual reaction to like maybe the Ethereum DAO hack is like, yeah, they did the right thing. This bad person stole it or whatever,
right?
But it breaks a pretty, it all of a sudden takes the system which operates without human judgment and introduces human judgment.
Yeah,
right.
I really think it's dangerous to cross that boundary. But I think in the scenario we're talking about, it's a really interesting discussion. So I don't have a super strong view on it other than like it's a very non-obvious solution.
Is there action that I think most Bitcoiners abide by that principle of do as little harm as possible and only take individual action? What can someone potentially listening to this that says, okay, low risk, low probability, but big outcome from this? What can someone listening to this do today? Is it as simple as saying, hey, if you have any of your pub keys exposed or reused, just move any coins to a new address for which the pub key has never been exposed? Is that the kind of like practical individual action?
Yeah, honestly, I wouldn't. My advice would be not to worry about it generally. I think like much more practical, important things are just like, are you self-custodying? If not, learn more about that in self-custody. If you are, you probably could improve your OPSEC or your best practices on self-custody. So that seems like a far better use of one's time than worrying about quantum computers.
Well, this would have been a perfect time for Steve to shill his BCAP project, and he hasn't mentioned it yet. So my question is, will the BCAP project be addressing quantum as a paper and project that Steve Wren and Lynn Alden put together to kind of address how consensus is formed, and effectively what we're talking about is like the most extreme kind of challenge in consensus that I think we could see coming down the road. So is there anything in that this would impact sort of how you think about the stakeholders in the BCAP project?
That's a great question. I just jotted it down. It's an open source project, David, so we welcome your
yeah, well, I'm already thanked as a contributor, so my work is done.
I agree with you that I think it makes like a nice chapter or appendix in the Bitcoin consensus analysis project as like a scenario. Because that project, the first half of the content really just sets up like, oh, here's 6 stakeholder groups, their powers and their motivations, stuff like that. Then right now there's a pretty deep analysis on one potential kind of reckless scenario with consensus, just to sort of educate how things could go awry. I think, but there's many types of scenarios in the future that are possible. And I agree, the one we just talked about would be a great write-up. So, yeah, I'd love to see it. This project, while there were 3 of us who co-authored it, we just started it. We had 24 people review it. Thank you, David. And then, but it's public now. Anyone can contribute. Would love to see someone come along and add that chapter.